I love that scene. I just think that is so remarkable to be able to experience something like that. And that just kind of makes it come alive. I hope you enjoyed that here as we think about what it means to walk on water with Jesus here. Let's go back and read the 2,000 year ago version in Matthew 14, 22 to 33. It says, "Immediately Jesus, made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. After he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, 'It's a ghost.' And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, 'Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid.' Peter answered him, 'Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water.' He said, 'Come.' So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, 'Lord, save me.' Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, 'O you of little faith, why did you doubt?' And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, 'Truly you are the Son of God.'" Back in 1986, after a 3-year drought in Israel, the waters of the Sea of Galilee had receded enough that a discovery was made in that mud and the sand, revealing a wooden boat, which was excavated and examined by archaeologists. The wood was so old it was of the consistency like wet cardboard, about to disintegrate. But by putting a stain of fiberglass over it, they could keep the wood preserved. The dating of the boat put it to the early 1st century. Now, no one can say this is the exact boat that Jesus and his disciples were in, but at least it was a contemporary of that boat. And now it's on display in a museum along the Sea of Galilee, well preserved, a 2,000-year-old fishing boat. They used metal rods underneath to be able to hold it together, and the outside of the boat is made of oak wood and the planks made of cedar. Both very valuable rarities from the area, probably imported in. There were signs on the boat that it had been repaired several times. Different spots had new nails put into it. The boat has definitely gotten a lot of use by some fishermen who lived during that time. And if it didn't belong to Andrew and Peter, James, or John, it's very possible it belonged to somebody that they knew. It's hard to tell from the picture, but the boat is 27 feet long. It's 7.5 feet wide in the middle. At one time, it had a mast on it with sails, and it seated about 16 people comfortably. Not all, but several of the disciples were fishermen, and they used a boat to get back and forth across the lake to get to new places. And several of the stories of Jesus take place on the Sea of Galilee around a boat. So the disciples had already witnessed when Jesus calmed a storm once in their life, when they were about to capsize and drown. But here they are. They're out on the rough sea again. This time, Jesus is not in the boat, but he comes out to them, walking on the water as if he's walking on dry land. And it's the middle of the night, and they see something moving out there, so they immediately think they've seen a ghost or something, because they knew they had left Jesus behind. Jesus said, "I'm leaving the crowds. I'm going to go spend some time alone. I'm going to go pray on the mountaintop. You guys go out on the boat." But when they are afraid, he immediately calmed their fears by stating that it was he. This time, though, he didn't stop the wind and the waves. Nothing stopped. It was going on. It wasn't maybe a storm that would kill them, but it was very difficult for them to be able to maneuver the boat because of the wind and the waves that were there. He didn't calm the storm, but he calmed their hearts here. He tells them, "Do not be afraid," because his presence is enough to be able to trust and to grow so that fear diminishes. Peter, the impulsive one of the group, and remember, he's probably the leader of the 12 disciples. He's probably the oldest. And as we've talked about before, it's most likely that the disciples were all teenagers, because teenagers were the ones who, had a teacher that they followed. And so they weren't men in beards probably yet. unless they're having early puberty there. But Peter was married, so he was probably the older one, and probably a young married man at the time. And by this time, the disciples, they've witnessed some really awesome things. If you've been following along, almost every week there's some sort of miracle, some sort of supernatural thing that's been going on that they've witnessed. And so they know that Jesus is the king of the supernatural. And so Peter, I don't know, impulsively or what, he asked Jesus, hey, can I come out there too on that water with you? Which makes me wonder, when they're traveling around these 3 years, did the disciples would they be sitting around the fire some night and they'd say, hey, Jesus, can you just make me fly a little bit here? Can we try some tricks? Jesus, could you make me invisible so I could go sneak up on my sister and scare her? I mean, you wonder if any of those conversations took place. Or, man, I got a sunburn today. Jesus, can you make that go away, please? I mean, did they use his ability to be able to help them, further them along in their comfort? Maybe when he said, hey, we're going to head down to Jerusalem, and it's a several-day journey through the hot, desert, did they say, could you just teleport us there and make it easier? I mean, you just wonder if they ever was asking questions like that. This is one time when we see Peter, one of the disciples, asking a question, hey, can I do this too? Will you let me do this? You wonder if sitting around that fire, did Jesus ever entertain them doing little magic trick sort of things? We don't know all that, but obviously Jesus was capable of doing all kinds of things, and it really blew the minds of these 12. We don't know if they ever made requests like that or not, but they knew that Jesus could do impossible things and make them possible. So Peter says, hey, can I walk on top of that water too? Something that physically, according to the laws of nature and science, is impossible for us to be able to, with our weight, walk on top of the water. And just as in the modern day version here, that, when Jesus said to Mac, he goes, you could do it if what? If I'm with you. You could do it if I'm with you. Jesus told Peter, if you have the faith, you don't doubt, then come on out here with me. Now again, faith is not in ourselves. Sometimes it's about mustering up our own ability to do something, but that's not what it's about. Faith is not looking on the ability to do something, but on the one who's with us when we are asked to do something. Our faith is in who, not what, or not in ourselves. And of course, when Peter starts walking out, he sees the wind and the waves, and he gets his eyes off of Jesus, and what happens? He begins to sink. And I love it because that word pops up again. It says Jesus immediately, twice. He immediately calmed their fears, and now he immediately grabbed onto Peter to keep him from going down under the water. You would think that after Peter took his turn, maybe the other 11 were saying, okay, me too, I want to go try that. As if Jesus is some sort of carnival ride. But no, we read that they got into the boat, Jesus and Peter got into the boat. And what did the disciples do next? Do you remember what they did when they got into the boat? It says that they worshiped Jesus. They worshiped him. They began to understand even a little bit more who he was, and that he, as the Son of God, was God and worthy of worship. They saw Jesus give peace to the storm, and that happened after they got into the boat. They saw that happen again. And, if you think about it, Peter, he had a victory. He walked out there, but he also had a failure, didn't he? He took his eyes off of Jesus. But yet still, he was able to come back and worship. And I think that's a great thing for us. I know we have days where we can walk by faith and take the steps that God has for us. We have other days when it's really hard and we fall down and we begin to sink. But in the end, what do? We come back and do what? We worship him. Just like the song we sang earlier. Man, when God gives or takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord. If we're in a day where we're receiving the blessings of God, or whether those blessings have been taken away from us, our response is still about blessing his name. I mentioned last week that Jesus never went around telling everybody, hey, I'm the Son of God. I'm the second person of the Trinity. You need to believe in me in that sense. He went around calling himself the Son of Man. He focused on his humanity because he wanted to identify with the people that he came to live with, the ones that he came to serve. And when he talked about the Father up in heaven, he used that word, Abba, which is like translated Papa. It's a very endearing thing, and that showed that in the movie clip as well. Jesus wanted everybody to get to know his Papa, and he was there to represent him and to lead people to understand how much Papa loved them. Next week, our sermon is going to take us, and if you looked at the title of it in there, it's called Confirmation, Declaration, Transformation. A lot of big words right there, because the disciples are going to, at least 3 of them, are going to get to see the Son of God in his fullness, in his glory. Right now, they've just seen the Son of God doing things that were pretty glorious. But next week, the story is going to take us to there. But even in this boat, the disciples are starting to figure it out now that this isn't just somebody sent from God as a prophet, but this is God himself. This is that moment when it's starting to cross over to the other side. And they're beginning to see Jesus for who he really is. Jesus didn't come just announcing the kingdom of God and that he's the Messiah and he's the one. And he wanted people to figure it out. And so that's a challenge for us to keep figuring it out. Who is God? Who is this Jesus? And that's why we're studying his life this year, to get to know him better so that we can understand who he is and what it means to us. You know, that when God came, or when Jesus came, he was revealing the fact that there were like 3 parts to God. You know, before that, it was just God is one. You know, it was a very monotheistic. There's a God up there. And then he's showing that there's different sides of God. God is a father, a papa. God is a son in the body of Jesus. But God is a spirit that's everywhere around us. And so all these things it's brand new paradigms. And in the clip, when Mac is saying, you don't line up with the religion I've been taught, you know, that's what's happening here as well. Because these disciples, they had a whole different idea of God. And Jesus is changing that radically. Now, of course, we live after the fact, so it's a little bit easier for us to kind of put it together, but it still takes faith, doesn't it? It's faith to understand things that don't make sense. How can God be 3 different things, but he's all one? And what's it really mean? And what's it mean to have faith? And how does it look like in my life with my circumstances? What does faith look like? We still have to figure it out on our own. It's not about just the religious traditions and the rules, the do's and don'ts, the religious masquerading, trying to be a good Christian. Jesus said in there, he says, I don't need slaves. I want people to be free, to experience my love and to show me love in return. Now, there might be some do's and don'ts that come with love, doesn't it? Love has lots of do's and don'ts. But the source is not slavery. The source is love. And the Apostle Paul later on is going to say, I wish we could all comprehend the love of God, how wide it is, how high it is, how deep it is, and how long it is. He said, if we could understand that kind of love, man, it would make so much difference in our lives. And so that's what we want to be able to do. And that faith will lead us to that love. And when we walk out on the water of life and the wind and the waves are around us, is Jesus going to let us drown? Don't you think he's going to reach out his hand every time that we get our eyes off of him and we kind of start to slip? Because why? Because he loves us. And he tells us, like Peter, he says, look to me, have faith, don't doubt. It's about who we're with. Not about ourselves, but about who we're with. The object of our faith is Jesus, God himself, who loved us enough to leave the throne of heaven, to take on a mortal body, to become a sacrifice. And as we just went through Easter, and we looked at what Jesus as the bread of life, that he gave his flesh and he gave his blood for us as we celebrate communion today, that he gives that love to us, each and every one of us, that it reaches out and accepts it and walks out on the water. And when we leave this place today, this sanctuary, this is a safe place. Picture this as our boat. We're in our boat today, but when we leave here, we're going out on the waters. So as you leave, whichever door you go out of, I know there's steps everywhere, but we're going out onto those waters today in our week. And so where are we going to fix our eyes? Who are we going to fix our eyes upon? And that's our challenge today, following Peter's footsteps, the father of our Christian faith. Let's get out of our boats and let's walk on the water with Jesus. Let me pray.